Hey, this is Todd, and here are some tips for creating your next player character in no particular order. I'm just going to riff some of these out, and they're just things that I think I've seen in my experience and looking online and reading about people making characters and having played in a lot of parties. Just some ideas that I've got. Avoid extremes. If you're someone who always creates the character who hates everything or loves everything or always does this or always does that and is always to the infinite degree on a type of behavior, see what happens if you pare it down a little bit. Go for something a little bit more muted, nuanced, not something that controls your behavior that you always have to do something. First, it's always interesting to take on that role. It's a little bit harder in a sense, but I think also that challenge can lead to be more rewarding to play somebody where you have to find a gray area that's not way out at the edges. It's very easy to play the say the half elf that just hates all goblins and just kills them on sight. That's very easy. It's an extremely easy thing to do. You've almost given up any kind of choice. You see a hobgoblin, you have to kill it. Simple. But there's also a burden that's attached to that. And particularly when you're dealing with species or things that are very common in the game, your character sees a goblin and you go, yeah, I'm going to go and kill it. But this time you're in the tavern or, you're in the middle of town and that goblin is not a bad person, didn't do anything to you. And now this burden is on the rest of the party where they're going, oh gosh, what do we do? We got to stop him from seeing the goblin. And maybe that's funny at first or it's fun, but after a while, it can really be tiresome to deal with. And it gives something that everybody dreads. I remember playing in parties where there was one character who couldn't come into towns because I think they were raging alcoholics or something of that sort. Just couldn't bring them in town. So there was always this part where we had to split the party outside of town. Say, okay, somebody's got to stay with them. Make sure they don't come into town. Everybody's going to go in. Then we'll switch because then the other person needs to go into town. And what started out as maybe something, a concept that someone thought was fun, or it was a little bit edgy, or it was interesting, it just turns into kind of a drag. And since your campaign is probably going to be more than one session, right? In a session and in a one shot, maybe that's fun to have all these extreme behaviors. You just kind of go through it and it's great. But if you're going to be playing in a steady campaign, that extreme behavior is just going to tend to wear everybody down. So if you're someone who you're writing down ideas and they look pretty extreme, or you've played a lot of kind of extreme characters in the past, maybe just something to think about. See what happens if you pick somebody who's more in the middle of the personality spectrum, who maybe you have to be a little bit more, again, playing in the nuances, playing in the gray area. See how it fits. See how it works. As part of your session zero, part of your background, part of your character creation, create connections to other party members. There's always a constant tension at the beginnings of campaigns with how do you keep the party together. At a certain point, through whatever circumstances, the party's pretty much joined and then it's not a problem. But there's always these areas that come up, maybe at the very beginning, maybe after the first mission, where this comes this moment where you finished one thing or you haven't started it yet. And it's sort of like, well, why do we stay together? And then you're trying to create reasons and the GM may be worried about how can I get them together? How can I get them to all go here because their goals are all over the map. And so they're just going to scatter, help them out, make it easy for everybody. As part of that session zero, when you're creating backgrounds, you're creating your character, explicitly create connection to other party members. Answer the question for everybody at the table, pose it to them and answer it for your own character. Why are we here together? If you do that, you'll be able to, it'll introduce a lot of story elements between your character and the other characters, because you'll have these connections, which means you can build off of them. They don't even have to be all positive. Maybe you guys could be from the same town, but you were rivals for a love, and something happened to that lover, and maybe that's why you're both out here, but you have this tension between you because you were both competing. That would be something, but it gives you reasons to be together, which is going to be easier for you. It's going to be easier for the GM. It's just going to be easier all around in it. It sort of replaces a bad kind of meta tension of how do we keep this party together to more interesting tensions in the fiction between characters. Think about how your characters related, connect them to the other characters in your party. Save your most interesting stuff for the campaign. When we think about backstories or just that backstories, they happen in the background. You can end up making a really long, complex history for your character that in many ways can be much more interesting than what you're actually going to do going forward. There's no reason why your backstory should overshadow the story you're going to tell. So if you're creating your character and your backstory is really getting long and involved and complicated and massive in scope and in weight, pull back for a second and think about, do I really need to have all of this? Pare it down maybe to more essentials, pare it down to stuff that really fits more in the background. Because if all this interesting stuff already happened to you, How are you going to overcome or do better than you already, had done? Save the good stuff for what's coming, and let the backstory be just that, the stuff that's behind you, the stuff that's in the background. Versatility in your character class or how you're building your character is good. I know there's a lot where people are really involved with optimizing their characters, and a lot of times that optimization means you're hyper specializing in one thing, and that has a cost, which is that you're specializing in your character in one thing, one aspect, then other things are getting downgraded. You're becoming worse at and worse at because you're spending all your, your skills, your feats, and everything in one direction. So you become very specialized in doing one thing, and you do that one thing really well, but it means you're doing a lot of other things not very well at all. And this has two drawbacks. One, just in the fiction, your character becomes sort of a one-trick pony, which can hurt how they can perform under certain situations. Some things just aren't going to work all the time. And if you only have one thing you can do, then what happens when you can't do that thing anymore? And just from a fictional standpoint, you're kind of stuck. You then are relying on the rest of your party to fill in for you, which may work sometimes. Other times it may not work that well. Other times they may not be able to either. And that can be, in the fiction, it can be a bad thing, but it also can be a bad thing on a meta level because it can lead to frustrations. You as a player may become frustrated. Why has the GM put my character in a situation where they can't do this thing that they do? The GM may feel the same frustration of, why can't I do this thing that I want to do, because I'm going to make this player feel bad because their character can't do what they are going to do. So let's say, for example, I was doing adventure based on mists and fogs, and I wanted to have some kind of gaseous form that they're fighting. But one of my characters in the group is playing a fighter or rogue, whatever that's hyper specialized in grapple. So I had built up this whole thing to do a fog gaseous form, and now they're grapplers. So I may feel stuck because what do I do? I built this all up. This is what I really want to do. But if I do that, then they can't grapple. Of course, the grappler character is going to be like, why does the GM making this whole encounter where I can't grapple anything? And then other party members may be like, man, we got this fighter and now he's useless. And they may be mad at the player. They may be mad at the GM. They may be mad at both. And it doesn't need to be that way. If you feel like you're getting really hyper specialized, and again, there's nothing particularly wrong with it. If that's what you want to do, by all means do it. But what I'm suggesting is just think about it, is having, maybe peeling off one bonus from being the uber grappler to be able to do something else might give you a benefit that you're not going to miss. So you won't, instead of grappling 90% of the time, most things, you'll grapple 80% of the time. But now it's giving you a chance towards something else that you may need at one point, when that 5% chance to do something else becomes much more important than the 10% chance that you had extra to grapple. So it's just something to think about. Think about versatility. It's not a bad thing. Hyper specialization is great, but it can also hurt. Just if you've been doing it one way, maybe try doing it the other way. See how it works. Try things you haven't tried before. There's a race you always gravitate towards playing. Try playing a different race. There's a class you always play. Try playing a different class. See what happens. A lot of times you can really grow as a player by taking on a role or an identity that's outside your comfort zone. And often as players, we find that comfort zone, we find that race and class combination that we really like, and we tend to play it over and over again. Maybe the variations will change a little bit, but you just tend to do that. I know some players who they'll have two of them. They'll do kind of fighter magic user, fighter magic user, fighter magic user, just kind of rotating around. Maybe at one point they'll try something else and they'll find they really like it. And you won't know until you try it. Maybe you think, oh, I hate rogues. I don't like it. It doesn't appeal to me. But then when you play the rogue, then you say, wow, this is a lot better than I thought. This is great. Maybe I should play this more often. Not only does it take you out of the rut just as far as what you're playing, it also opens up other ways to play. If you've always been playing a fighter who's used to getting in front, it's a much different experience when you have to play the rogue and you're trying to work that hiding and getting those sneak attacks, or work your rogue skills. When usually as a fighter, you're kind of waiting for the rogue to go and detect traps or sneak down the hallway. Now you get to do that kind of sneaking. So you get to see these different parts of the game that you didn't have before, which can give you a greater appreciation for all the different party roles, something that you may not have done before. It's just all in all a good thing. If you feel like you've been playing the same thing over and over again, try something new. Try a new class, try a new race, see how it fits. If you don't like it, you can always toss it and do something else. So it really doesn't hurt to try. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the character creation / optimization / build subgame, where you're building your character and you're saying, okay, at level 1 and 2, I'm going to take fighter, and level 3, I'm going to take 2 levels of Rogue, and then I'm going to take 3 levels of Warlock to get that. Then I'm going to go back to Fighter, then I'm going to go back to Rogue, and by level 20, I'm going to have Batman. Not my favorite thing in the world, but I get that it's very popular, and there's no wrong way to play, so if that's what you like, go for it. But what I would say is one thing that you're doing when you're plotting your character out from basically their birth all the way to theoretically when they hit level 20 is you're really closing that off from the game. This is something that you're essentially saying this identity of your character is outside what's happening in the fictional world. Because you're planning out Batman, it doesn't matter what happens in the game fiction, Batman is coming, right? Because it's pre-planned. Outside the game, outside the universe, I'm making Batman. So I'd say is if that's something you do, and I'm not saying don't multi-class, I'm not saying don't do anything. What I'm saying maybe is more see if you can do it organically. See if you can just play the game starting with Rogue, if that's what you want, or Fighter, whichever class, and then just letting the world and your character interact, and then seeing what flows from that. Maybe you'll end up with Batman at the end of it. Maybe you'll end up with something totally different. I love stories when I hear them about players who took a character in a different direction because of something that happened in the game. Like I think one I read that there was one character, I can't remember what class they were, and another member of the party who they had a very close bond with in game was a paladin, and that character got killed. So then they hit a milestone or whatever, they reached the next level, and then the surviving character took a level of paladin to honor their friend. That's really great. I think in the case I wrote it for, it was totally not the optimal character build sort of thing to do, but it was something that had resonance in the game. It makes a really great story. And now there's this element in the fiction and the character's growing. And if you were to look at the character, you could see how the world and the character interacted to see that build, that growth, right? So now we had, say, if it was a rogue, and then an event in-game happened, and now it took that character down a slightly different path to paladin. That's amazing, but it can't happen if you've predetermined every step of the way beforehand. It can't happen if you're going to Batman because you're going to say, I can't take a level of paladin. That makes no sense for my Batman build. Well, maybe they don't be Batman. Maybe they be something else. Maybe they be something more unique. Yeah, maybe it's suboptimal too. That's okay. See how the world and your character interact, and then just play it kind of organically. You don't need to predetermine everything up front. Let everything work together, see how it fits. So those are my tips for your next videos character. Like these, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. It helps me out a lot. I also have a Patreon if you'd like to support the show in a different way. Thanks for watching.